thank you so much for being here to hear about what's going on in our own community. I just want to draw your attention to this piece of paper I have here. I'm going to set it somewhere at the side. I also have the book here. And this is called Women on the Ballot. And it is a great book that has a lot of stories about women who have been elected to power, who have been in positions either as MPs, MPPs. And it's a great read because the whole point behind Engaged Women of Huron is to get women to be more involved in making informed decisions about the people that we elect and make good decisions if they choose to run themselves. So we want you to be her. And if you can't be her, we want you to support her, and we also want you to celebrate her. So those are the things that are really important and dear to me, and that's why this is important tonight. So I'm going to hand the rest of the evening over to Monica Walker-Bolton, who has graciously agreed to be our moderator. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kimberly. Good evening, everybody. I'll ask the candidates to take their spots. So in the green room backstage, we established the order of speaking. So the first person who will introduce themselves tonight to you is Ben Lobb. Ben Lobb is the candidate for the Conservative Party. And the second candidate to introduce themselves to you tonight will be Alan Thompson. Alan Thompson is the candidate for the Liberal Party. The third candidate who will introduce themselves to you tonight is Nicholas Wendler. Nicholas Wendler is the candidate for the Green Party. And Tony McQuail will introduce himself to you in the fourth spot. Tony McQuail is the candidate for the New Democratic Party. So the format for this evening is each of these candidates is going to have 2 minutes to introduce themselves. And then we will move into the question portion of the debate. And the format for the questions is there will be questions that have been pre-established from the floor. And the order of answering questions is the person who spoke second. So Alan Thompson will receive the first question. Nicholas Wendler will receive the second question. Tony McQuail will receive the fourth question, and Ben Lobb, the third question, and Ben Lobb will receive the fourth question. Each of the people receiving the question first will have 1 minute to answer, and then the other candidates will have 30 seconds to answer that question. And so my role will be to keep things orderly and professional. So I take that role very seriously and honored to have that role. So with no further ado, I will ask our first candidate, Ben Lobb, to introduce himself.
Thanks, Monica. These are amplified. Okay, I wasn't sure if this was just for the recording or so everybody could hear. So can everybody hear okay? Yes. Okay. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before I start, I'll say these are the most comfortable chairs we've had at any debate so far. So, one of us may fall asleep before the night's over, but I'm sure the debate will keep us awake. My name is Ben Lobb. I'm the Conservative candidate for Huron-Bruce. I'd like to thank Engaged Women and all the sponsoring organizations for putting the debate on tonight. And I'd like to congratulate all the other candidates here tonight, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out of your schedule and attending this important debate. A new Conservative government will work with Canadians to build a better Canada, a more prosperous Canada. We'll invest in rural infrastructure, water, sewer, roads, bridges, and community centers. We will rebuild our relationship with our largest trading partners. China has banned beef, pork, soybeans, and canola. This has cost the Canadian economy over $1 billion. Our relationship with India has also deteriorated. They've added tariffs on many egg products that we export to them. And then the United States. We've had tariffs put on steel, aluminum, softwood lumber, disputes that span 2 presidents, and an unacceptable Buy America provision. A renegotiated NAFTA deal that has left little, if any, gains for Canada. We will once again make sure that agriculture and rural communities become a priority. We'll fix the taxation rules for small businesses who are incorporated. We'll make it easier for first-time home buyers to achieve their dreams of home ownership. And we'll encourage investment to come back into our resource sector in Canada. Canadians are missing out on $15 billion a year in economic activity. We'll develop our resources while implementing a comprehensive environmental plan that supports new technology, environmental preservation, encourage the rest of the world to buy our resources with the highest environmental standards. A government that puts more money in your pocket so that you can get ahead. On October 21st, I ask you to vote Ben Lobb, vote Conservative. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. I'll now ask Alan to give us his introduction.
Hello everyone, I want to echo Ben. Thanks for organizing this event. It's unique to this election. Ben and I ran 4 years ago and we didn't have a debate with this format. So thanks for that, thanks for coming. And I just want to start, reach into your purse, reach into your wallet. You might find one of these. I actually had to go to the convenience store where Heather gave me one for another 10. This is the $10 bill with Viola Desmond's face on it. Now, you might see this as a symbolic gesture. In some ways it is symbolic. But also I think very, very important. And now a generation of young girls, women, young boys and men, for the first time ever, are seeing a Canadian woman on our currency. And to me, that's kind of emblematic of what I think is one of the most successful aspects of the Trudeau Liberal government, a great accomplishment that I just don't think people talk about enough. And that is a really, really important focus on gender and gender equality. This is a government that on its first day in office put in place a gender-balanced cabinet. First time in our history. And why not? You know, why not do that? It's a government that has made sure that all government appointments, at least 50% of those appointments are filled by women, which is an absolute watershed in the way we're governed and the way government operates. 40% of those sitting in the Senate, 47% of those sitting in the Senate now are women, and we will reach gender equity very soon. 54% of judges in this country appointed by the federal government are women, up from 32% in the previous government, just in a few years. So, really incredible accomplishment, and I think it underlines what we're doing here tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Alan. I'll now ask Nicholas Wendler to introduce himself to the group.
I'm Nicholas Wendler, running for the Green Party of Canada. This is my second time running federally with leader Elizabeth May. We have a strong climate action plan. And thanks for having me here and organizing.
Okay, thank you very much. I will now ask Tony McQuail to give us his introduction.
Well, friends, I first ran in 1980 because I was concerned about the environment and about an inequitable situation where we had successive conservative and liberal governments saying that we had to have high interest rates to fight inflation caused by the quadrupling of crude oil prices during the Arab oil embargo. And the New Democrats said, that doesn't make sense. If the inflation is caused by energy pricing, we ought to be talking about conservation and renewable energy and efficiency. And that made a lot of sense to me, because we actually had a situation where the high interest rates were making inflation worse, and we're being very hard on farmers, small business people, and homeowners. And that was my introduction to politics. In this election, I've been talking about three key words for me: representation, regeneration, and redistribution. Representation, because the Liberals and Conservatives have been serving the 1% in Canada since the time of Confederation. But it wasn't until after the First World War that women got the vote and working people got the vote. And isn't it about time that your vote counted in every election? How many people feel their vote should count for representation every time they vote? Okay. How many people feel your neighbor's vote should count every time we have an election and they vote? That's the way you build a democracy that actually represents the society. And at its best, democracy helps us find our collective wisdom. My other words are regeneration, because if we don't start taking better care of this planet, it's going to stop taking care of us. And the third one is redistribution. Because we've had a system of taxation and other things that have been focusing wealth more and more at the top. My dad used to say, money's like manure. It does the most good when you spread it around. So that's what we need to be thinking about, and I'm very proud of our New Deal for People, which would help do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. Okay, we're going to move into our questions from the floor in the moment, but I'm going to make a request to the candidates that when we answer these questions, could you just answer them seated from your spot? The first question is from the floor, and do we have that first question? Michelle? And this will be directed for Alan to answer first, and then the other candidates will have time to answer afterward.
Right, and I just wanted to clarify that the candidates have these questions in advance so that people know that the first 5 questions that are being asked, they had time to prepare for these. And then there's some in a basket that hopefully some of you contributed to, and we will pull some of those out as time allows. So my question is, representation is a crucial component of democracy. In this riding, there are 5 men running to represent all citizens of Huron County, of which 51% are women. What will you do to ensure that the ideas and concerns of women constituents in your riding are heard if you are elected?
Thanks. Well, there should be more women running for office. There aren't in this election, but I think in future I'd be happy to work with anybody who wants to embark on the incredible journey of running for office. So if anyone wants to talk to me, I think we could learn a lot from each other. A good member of Parliament should be listening to everybody and be out there and engaging at every level. The problem is women are very much underrepresented in a lot of our official bodies, governing bodies. So I think a good MP, you got to seek people out. You don't wait for them to come to you. You have to go where they are. And I think as a member of Parliament, you also need to use that platform to draw attention to important issues that need more attention. Violence against women, mental health, LGBTQ issues. I think you need to engage on issues. As a candidate, I've made a practice of attending Women's Day events, Pride events, reaching out and engaging with anyone and everyone in the riding. And I think that's a way to more effectively try to represent. I can't change who I am, but I think I can try to draw the focus as much as possible to issues that all issues are women's issues, but I think everybody knows there are issues that end up having more impact on women. Childcare often ends up being a primary responsibility. So I think you just need to reach out. And I'm guessing that the timekeeper is not working because I think I've talked for longer than...
Okay, thank you very much for that, Alan. We'll continue with the same order, so I'll allow Nicholas to answer that question next, and you have 30 seconds.
I feel like listening and understanding. I guess reaching out and being there to listen and understand and help the constituents with what they get, what they need and want.
Okay, thank you very much, Nicholas. And next to Tony.
Thank you. I'm a member of the Religious Society of Friends, or Quakers, which felt that women were equal to men from its very inception in the 1600s. So listening thoughtfully and carefully is something that I think we always need to do, and because of our consensus-based decision-making, that's what we've had to do from the inception of our organization as a religious society. But I think the other thing that we need to recognize is the challenges that women particularly face Our process of selecting candidates involves reaching out. We talked to over 20 people, over half of which were women, to look for people who would want to run in this. And there are costs in terms of family time.
Time is
Time's up.
pretty much up. Sorry about that, but I will try to keep to it since that's my job. And the final answer to that one will be from Ben.
Well, first of all, I think we need to recognize and celebrate the fact that we've had a female elected to provincial parliament since 1995. So don't forget Helen Johns and Carol Mitchell and Lisa Thompson have been doing a great job in Queen's Park since 95, and we're probably one of the only ridings in all of Canada that can claim that. So that's one thing, but accessibility, I attend hundreds of events each and every year. There's people in the crowd here that have called, emailed, texted me for a meeting, and I think that's the most important thing, is to be accessible and open for meetings.
Okay, thank you very much to all the candidates for the answer to the first question, and I have the next question coming from the floor. I believe Nina Reynolds has that one, and the first person to answer this question will be Nicholas. So, to you, Nina.
If elected, how do you plan to advocate for the health of Huron-Bruce residents through climate change policy? How will you account for health in your cost-benefits analysis of policies related to climate change mitigation? How will your party ensure that Canada is doing our part to mitigate global climate crisis?
And that's to you, Nicholas.
As we, the Green Party, would restore the federal provincial health accord, basing health transfers on demographics and real healthcare needs in each province, rather than having the current system based on GDP growth that was introduced by the Herbert government and retained by the Liberals. We would establish a national mental health strategy and suicide prevention strategy to address the growing anxieties plaguing Canadians regarding inequality and affordability, the growing precariousness at work and housing, the climate crisis, social isolation, resurgent racial and ethno-nationalism, and other harms and risks.
Okay, thank you very much, Nicholas Wendler. And the next answer to that one will go to Tony.
We're proposing putting a tax on wealth over $20 million at 1% and going after tax evaders and trying to make sure that we actually get the money that we need to put into health. We're proposing a head-to-toe pharmacare and dental care, as well as our current healthcare system, but to create a climate bank that would invest in climate change mitigation. And I urge you to take a look at our New Deal for People, which is a comprehensive thing and can really not be covered in 30 seconds.
Good timing. And the next person to answer that question will be Ben Law.
Thank you. And a 4-minute question by a 30-second answer is a challenge, but anyhow, the environment and your health, obviously everybody knows they're one and the same. What we're proposing is an environmental platform that looks at 3 guiding principles: green technology, cleaner, greener environment, and selling our great story around the world. Also infrastructure. We have a huge infrastructure deficit in Canada right now, and flood mitigation definitely needs to be part of that. 30 seconds.
Good job as well. And finally to Alan.
So, I mean, women and children are the first to feel the impact of climate change, both in Canada and around the world. So it's their health and it's the health of our planet. We have to have a price on carbon. We cannot turn back the clock on that issue. We're also looking to really step up the fight against climate change, net zero emissions by 2050, incentives for businesses to invest in green technology, planting 2 billion trees. I'm going to use every second left in my 30. We just got to do more. We really have to do more.
Okay, thank you very much. So I believe that brings us to everyone having answered that question. So we have the third question from the floor.
A living wage is the hourly wage a worker needs to earn their family's basic expenses after taking into account governmental benefits, taxes, and payroll deductions. In Huron County, that figure is currently $17.44 an hour, according to Huron-Perth United Way Living Wage Report. Currently, half of households in Huron County make less than a living wage. Income inequality continues to be an issue for all Canadians. How does your party plan to address both the poverty experienced within Huron County and the wider problem of continued income inequality for all Canadians?
Thank you, and Tony McQuail will answer that question first.
I mentioned getting serious about taxing those who have more. And one of the things recently in the Globe and Mail was that 2 men have more wealth than the bottom 30% of Canadians. That's 11 million Canadians. And are you familiar with a teeter-totter? Well, if you took the average wealth of one of those men and put it a centimeter from the fulcrum point, the average wealth of the rest of those folks would be 65 kilometers away in Shakespeare. That's how unequal we've gotten. We're talking about pharmacare, dental care, and investing in programs that will spread security across the society. And, do you count me down? Oh, because I'm talking. Oh, God! My wife tells me something. So, we've got a whole number of programs that will actually spread wealth out and spread security out across the society. And housing is also one of those, because that's also a critical need and a huge expense for people who on a minimum wage.
Thank you very much. And the next to respond to that will be Ben.
Thank you. It's an interesting labor market that we have right now, because you can go virtually every town in Huron-Bruce and you'll find people that will pay more than $18 an hour. Not every job, but they cannot fill the spaces. And there's likely some employers in here today that feel the very same way. There's 2 ways to do it. I believe that we need to definitely get it from the market instead of the government on labor rates. And in addition to that, we need to make life more affordable. And that's one of the big pillars of our platform: universal tax cut on income, reducing the GST off home heating fuel, things like that to help make life more affordable.
Okay, thank you. And Alan next.
I mean, when you knock on doors, you see the growing gap between rich and poor every day. I think the closest thing that we have now to a universal basic income is the Canada Child Benefit, which the Trudeau government created. It is tax-free. I meet someone every day for whom that program is a lifeline. And again, we can do more. We will increase the Canada Child Benefit. We will create paid maternity leave for those who otherwise wouldn't have access to maternity. Cut cell phone costs, affordability, cost of living. You hear it every day.
And thank you. And finally, Nicholas.
Our vision would have a guaranteed livable income to eliminate poverty.
Anything else you'd like to add to that? Okay, thank you. So we have the 4th question coming from the floor from Kimberly Payne. And that one will be addressed to Ben.
So this was a question that was actually posted on the Facebook page that we have for the Engaged Women of Huron. And I know this feels really scripted because people are reading their responses because they had time to respond to these and prepare for it. So I'm really looking forward to what's going to happen after this when we actually go to the questions that are live from the floor. Because I was hoping for more of a debate. You know, I was looking at people kind of get a little gritty with each other. That's not happening yet. So hopefully that will. Everybody seems to be mostly in agreement with each other. So I suppose that's good. So this was on the Facebook page, and the question is, according to Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, 40% of agricultural emissions in Canada come directly from methane, with 90% from cattle and sheep. If the aim of carbon tax is to change behaviors that result in a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, what are your plans to address one of the largest producers of greenhouse gas, livestock farming?
And that's to you first, Ben.
Thank you for the question. So the first thing we would do, we're obviously saying we're going to scrap the carbon tax. We're going to use our plan that's really going to put caps on the big emitters, make the big emitters put investment in green technology to fix their emission problems. We're going to attack the problem. In regards to the livestock question, I mean, we are from Huron-Bruce, we are an agriculture sector. Bruce County is the most productive beef county, I think next to one county in Alberta. We need more beef production. Livestock for beef production in Canada accounts for 0.04% of the worldwide emissions. We need more, we need a bigger cattle herd actually in Ontario to keep our processors going. We need more labor, we need CFIA to be more reactive inside our process and kill plants. We have a great story to tell. Agriculture is the economic driver in Huron-Bruce. And sure, there's technologies we can use to look at biodigesters and things like that, but we have to support and embrace our livestock sector.
Thank you. And the next to answer that one will be Alan.
So yeah, we got to stand up for our farmers. We also have to invest in research, and the Trudeau government poured millions back into science-based, evidence-based research in agriculture. And there is some research on whether or not changing feed can reduce methane, sometimes by as much as 20%, depending on the feed that is readily available and that could be used. So let's work with farmers. They are the original innovators when it comes to our climate and our earth and our planet, and maybe we can figure out a way to do it better, working together.
Thank you. And to Nicholas next on that question.
We would adopt an animal welfare legislation preventing inhumane treatment of farm animals, including in intensive factory farming operations. It'll set a minimum standard of treatment and have a timetable for phasing out intensive factory farming and other inhumane animal husbandry practices. And set standards for distances that the animals can be transported and conditions for their slaughterhouses and auctions.
Okay, thank you. That's time. And the next person would be Tony.
Fran and I teach a course in holistic management, agricultural holistic management, that talks about healthy land, healthy people, healthy profits. How we manage things in agriculture can determine whether we're letting carbon dioxide go up in the atmosphere out of our soils or whether we're sequestering it in our soils. And if you manage livestock properly, they can sequester a lot in the soil. And I do have a handout which I'd be glad to give you that gives you some references on that. We weren't allowed to bring stuff in, but I'd be glad to see you after and give you that information. It's 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you to all of the candidates for going through our first 4 questions. So at this point, everybody's had a chance to answer one question first, and then the others have responded. So we do have one more 5th question that was provided to you ahead of time. And I'm just looking out to see, okay, and Jackie's got that one for you. So this will be a free-for-all. Whoever wants to answer this question first, if you want to put up your hand, I will call on the first person that responds. So we'll put that one over to Jackie.
So this is funny that I get this question because this is my first year of empty nesting. Affordable childcare is critical to working Canadian families. What is your party's plan to increase the number of spaces and decrease the cost of regulated, safe childcare to families in Huron-Bruce?
Okay, Al?
Well, we've already committed to 250,000 new before and after school spaces, trying to reduce the cost of those spaces by 10%, putting money into early childhood education. I mentioned paid maternity leave, increasing the cat on a child benefit, but we also just need to figure out how to do more in our rural communities. Many small towns in Huron-Bruce just don't have childcare available. Yes, it's available informally in homes, but very few towns in this riding have childcare facilities, and that's just astonishing. We really need to do something about that, and maybe it's transitioning some of the infrastructure that we have that we're not using to its fullest. So it's a huge issue. You hear about it every day, and we just need to put our heads together and figure out how to do more.
Okay. And anyone else want to jump in on the childcare question? Tony.
Well, we know how important it is. As when Fran and I were young farmers with young children, being able to take our daughters to the Wingham Daycare Center 3 days a week and plan for the times we'd be doing more dangerous things on the farm while they were safely in daycare. They got to visit the barn in the baby carriage when we were milking the goats or doing other things, but when you were handling the we're talking about 500,000 new daycare spaces and funding it now and making it happen now.
Okay, what I would say is the transfers, obviously you have to maintain steady transfers to the provinces so they can work on a strategy with the municipalities in the urban areas and around where the spaces go, how many be allocated, and it really needs to get right into the official plan of a municipality. And in addition to that, I would also say that if you take a look at a community like Kincardine or Port Elgin, they actually have the private sector that is taking this on as well. They've got a beautiful brand new facility, the north end of Port Elgin. So it could be a mix of government and private sector to make a great success for people's daycare situations.
Okay. And finally to you, Nicholas, did you want to weigh in on the childcare question?
Yeah, investing more money into childcare and having more childcare spaces kind of in line with where the parents would have to go to work, so they wouldn't have to go out of their way to drop their children off.
Okay. Anything else? All right. I see Michelle Hansen's on the move, so I think that means she has a question from the basket.
Well, we have a basket. We have 5 or 6 questions here, and I'm going to randomly ask people to pull one. If the questioner signed it, we're going to invite that person to come and ask the question directly to the candidate. And if they're unsigned, then I'm going to hand it to Monica, and she will do the asking. And because this is the unprepared portion, we think it's more fair to allow our candidates just a little more time. So I would ask our
45
seconds. 2 minutes per answer per person, okay? And so I'm giving that cue to our wonderful volunteer, Tony, and thank you, Tony, for doing that. So, right here, can I get you to hold that one? Thank you. Okay, and is it signed? It is signed. It is, okay. And it's signed by Wayne, I believe. So, the microphone is yours.
Thank you.
There's your question.
Big money is finding its way into our election system through third-party organizations that are aligned with the formal parties but swear they aren't controlled or directly affiliated with them. Ontario Broad is one example, but there appear to be several with a variety of alignments. This has alarmed election officials, but they've had limited success controlling them. Given the negative impact of largely unrestrained money in the U.S. elections and the reaction of Canadian election officials, what would you advocate be done to stop this in Canada?
And Wayne, do you have a candidate you'd like to direct to answer that first before the other candidates, or?
No.
No? Okay. I'll go back to our initial order then, so I'll ask Ben Lobb to answer that question first.
Well, nobody knows how that feels more than me.
Okay.
Last election, my good friend Jerry Diaz with Unifor, they protested my office in Port Elgin on a weekly basis during the last election. So third-party money, I felt it right here at home. So there's a lot that we can do. This has been going on for an awful long time before any of us got involved in politics. If you want to keep politics, I would say, available to the average person, such as us up here today, to get involved, you have to get rid of the third-party money. It's a problem provincially. It's probably a worse problem provincially. It's a problem federally as well. And it should have been probably brought forward in the Democratic Reform Bill that the government, the day, brought forward. They would probably deal with it enough. There's still lots of third-party money out there. Some of it can come from the United States. Some of it comes from wealthy people. Some of it comes from labor. And it's a big problem. There should be a $20 million or a $22 million spending limit for each political party. And I really believe, other than that, it should be the money at the local level that you can spend, which is about $100,000 an election. And I really think that equals it all out. So it makes it even for the Green Party, the NDP, Conservatives, the Liberals, whoever wants to run. It makes it a very much level playing field and takes out a lot of nefarious activity, as far as I'm concerned.
All right, thank you for that. So continuing with the order, I'll go to Alan next.
I mean, I'm less concerned about people who would demonstrate in public, because you know who they are. They say who they are. They have a right. Although if money is being spent to do that, I agree. I think we should be looking much more carefully at third-party outside spending. We do not want to descend any further down the slippery slope to the way politics works these days in the United States. It's kind of terrifying right now. But we do have examples of it here. And, you know, the trouble is, much of this kind of merges with the whole issue around social media, quasi-cyberbullying of political figures, organizations that are very murky and not transparent. Ontario Proud, which Wayne mentioned, is a classic example. And its political alignment is clear. It's what's not clear is who's backing it, who's behind it, who's feeding, is there any coordination? And there are also sites on the left that I kind of dismiss when I see them coming into my feed. So I think this is something that we could reach across party lines and try to agree that we don't think this battle should be fought by murky, mysterious figures, largely on social media, who just have no responsibility for the content that they're putting out, and the lies and misinformation and falsehoods and just malicious content that contributes nothing to our electoral process. It actually does the opposite. I think it really detracts from the process. So I'd love to see a sort of cross-party initiative on this, and if we can just get back to us talking to each other and talking to you and listening to you about what's happening during an election campaign.
Okay, thank you. And Nicholas, did you want to weigh in on that, the question of the money in politics?
I'm not sure what to say at this moment.
Not sure? Okay. The next person to respond to that question would be Tony.
Yes, remember that fulcrum with the 1 centimeter and the 65 kilometer distance? That creates a lot of different leverage potential. And so yes, certainly keeping third parties from manipulating or funding in elections is essential. But you have to remember, we did have something in place that said you got a federal or government payment based on how many votes you got, which started to at least make a certain amount of money proportional to what kind of support people got, which the Harper government canceled. And so that was at least a little step toward some form of recognition of proportionality in terms of the electoral process, and a little step toward saying public funding of the electoral process rather than private funding. Now we've changed it so that at least officially you don't have corporate or union funding. But of course the way they get around that is they say to you, oh, well, if you'll give this amount of money to the Liberals or the Conservatives, or possibly the NDP, I don't think so, or maybe the Greens, but anyway, I know the way it works in the States and the way it was documented for both the Conservatives and Liberals. We say, you give this money to them, and we'll give the same amount to some of your favorite charities. And that's the way you privately give from an individual to a political party, and then turn around and reimburse that person. And that has been going on in the States a long time with their political action things. So this is difficult stuff to regulate and control, but it certainly is distorting. And that's where, if you say, one of the possibilities that if we're really serious about it would be to say, let's give every candidate a certain amount and a similar amount of money so they're all on the same length teeter-totter, and then let the public decide who they'd like to actually have represent them. But, you know, it is a challenge, and Election Canada is having a real struggle with it. And the fact that they've said you can't talk about climate change unless you're registered as a third party was a real bizarre one to me.
Right, thank you. And I think that has allowed all the candidates to have a chance at that question, so we'll move on to the next question.
Okay, I'm gonna ask Laura if she would pull one. Great, thank you. And is it signed? It's not signed, so
Then I get to shine.
I will deliver it
Thank you very much. So this was submitted by someone here tonight, and I'm happy to read it for them. So I won't decide who this goes to directly, but since Ben got to respond to the last question first, this one will go to Alan first. How will you support and encourage the welcoming of immigrants and refugees into Huron County? So that'll go to you first, Alan, please.
Okay. I mean, there's already a lot going on. Huron County, Bruce are making real strides in trying to attract and retain immigrants in our communities. I think we have real opportunities because there are now employers that are really, really anxious and interested in securing a workforce. And we have a number of Haters in Dashwood that has already got a lot of experience in working with temporary foreign workers. The frustration is they can't stay permanently. They don't have the same opportunity as the live-in caregivers who can come here for a certain period and then automatically qualify for permanent status in Canada. The government has put forward a pilot project specifically to look at rural communities. How can we find the labor needs and help those communities attract what used to be temporary foreign workers, attract people who could stay here on a permanent basis. When they launched this pilot, they did it in a few communities in Northern Ontario. I'm not sure how those decisions were made or what input there was, but I really wish we had one of those pilot opportunities in Huron-Bruce, because I think we're a terrific testing ground to try and figure out how can we attract and retain immigrants to our community, because there's just such a great opportunity there.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'll go to Nicholas next. How would you support and encourage the welcoming of immigrants and refugees into Huron County?
I don't feel like I have a good answer on the top of my head.
Okay. We'll move on to Tony.
Well, certainly, we need to work with employers, but also community groups and church groups to ensure that there's the kind of support and welcoming to the community that I felt when I came as an immigrant 55 years ago. And the other thing is to have the kind of social infrastructural supports that make it easier for people, and that's where our healthcare system is such a boon compared to what an immigrant finds if they go to the States. And if we add pharmacare, dental care, good child care support, and then also educational supports, which we're talking about in the post-secondary area, these all help make life financially easier for people who are often coming in initially at entry point, low wage jobs. Some certainly not, but many immigrants are being looked for those kind of entry point jobs. And so those are ways that we can, but I think it's critically important to be working with the communities so that people are feeling welcoming rather than resentful, because certainly we see people who are trying to use immigration as a flashpoint for building disagreement or even fueling kind of a hate attitude in society, which is really unfortunate, because it's not immigrants who are the creation of the disparity in society. And certainly in our area, both Huron and Bruce, jobs, the need for workers is important. But that's also where housing and transportation come into play. Because if people can't afford any kind of housing or aren't able to get to work, that becomes problematic, particularly for immigrants as well, because they don't already have the network of support that they might be able to utilize.
Okay, thank you. And finally to Ben.
Thank you very much. Well, we need more economic immigration into Huron-Bruce County. We have a huge labor shortage, and so we need a lot of people to come here, and we need a lot of people in all different fields of work. There's no doubt about that. And I've long been a proponent that the temporary foreign worker program is a good program, no doubt, but it's very, very difficult for a small business owner who maybe has 1 or 2 employees to navigate through. It's almost impossible. We need to make that easier. And we also need to make sure that when a temporary foreign worker comes here, the employer or someone in the community has the opportunity to vouch for them and give them a pathway to citizenship. It's ridiculous to bring somebody here, have a great worker, and then not be able to have them stay and become a Canadian citizen. That should be the reward for your hard work to the country. So we need that. We have funded years ago immigration and citizenship, a program with the County of Huron. I've invited Kristen Crane to come down through the County of Huron to appear at the Immigration Committee in this past year, and really turned a lot of heads. The Immigration Committee was very impressed with what Huron County has done, the County of Huron has done, and so I think we're leaders, and by the way, we're a pretty welcoming area to come to. I don't care what anybody says, we're very welcoming, and we've got a great place to live and a great story to tell. Pretty well all of us are immigrants, one time or another, right?
Monica,
Yep.
is it possible to ask a related question?
Sure, I'm the moderator.
Well, Tony touched on it, but I know that General Coach would like to hire 30 people, and Hensel Co-op and hire 30 people, the greenhouses in Exeter, the pot plant up north of here, but there is no place for these people to live.
Yeah.
I had an employee almost quit in Seaforth because her apartment or house, the landlord came back, and she was a good reason she got kicked out, and she looked everywhere. And, you know, and that's people here already. So related, very related,
Yeah.
is housing. How, you know, there's no use having all these good vibes about immigration. There's no place for them to stay.
Yeah. Excellent question. Is there a candidate you'd like to have tackle
No,
that
they
first?
can all-
Tony's eager, so I'll go to him first.
Well, we're saying that's a crisis that's been building. And so we're talking about creating 500,000 new housing units over the course of our mandate, and addressing the issues of foreign speculation and money laundering in the housing market to try and bring housing prices down. But we've got to build more. The other aspect of that is investing in infrastructure in terms of retrofitting housing, so our existing housing stock is far more energy efficient and low cost for people to maintain, and uses less energy, so it contributes to part of our climate change program. So those are all aspects of what we're talking about in terms of housing.
Okay. Anybody else want to jump in? Alan?
I mean, it's this trio of issues though. Part of the problem is it's not just you can't afford to live in a place. Where you can afford to live, you have no transportation to get to where the jobs are. So we've got this kind of killer combination when it should be a gift that we have such low unemployment. And we just need more innovative strategies for dealing with it. So we need to tackle housing. So we have at the high national level all these new housing spaces, but we're not getting very many of them in rural communities. So we need to get all the levels of government working together, being innovative, and trying to figure out how can we build on land that's already owned by municipalities. How can they fast track with developers to make this happen? Because it might not be the immediate instinct for a developer to build affordable housing. And our housing stock, look at our small towns. You walk around them and it's just, they're all stunningly beautiful, these great big houses, and you knock on their door and one elderly person comes out on the porch. And there are instances in some places where people are looking at sharing their homes. And how can we facilitate that? How can we try, I mean, government's not going to tell somebody what to do, but there are places where older people who would like to stay in their homes longer are sharing their space with younger people, sometimes at no cost, and sometimes older people who have special needs. And you see it can be a pretty interesting kind of chemistry across those generations. And transportation, there's no transit. We spend all this money on transit in the city. That's a good thing. It's important to fight climate change. We've got none. So what are our strategies? Well, every town has got a fleet of buses. They're orange. And they run in the morning, they run in the afternoon. They tried this in Muskoka. You'd have to figure it out. How would you make this work? What would be the subsidy? But run bus routes using existing infrastructure. Because in Toronto, when you get on the TTC, you're not paying the full price for that. It's heavily subsidized. We deserve that in our community as well.
Okay, Nicholas or Ben, did you want to weigh in on the housing question?
Monica, I thought as a planner, you might want to give your 2 cents.
I'm trying to stay neutral. So, yeah, I better back off on that.
I'm not gonna blame,
one.
I won't blame the planning department.
Yeah, okay.
anyways, But what I'd say is, we have to, yes, we need affordable housing, because there are people that want to have affordable housing, whether they're new couples, seniors, whatever, we do need more affordable housing here, that's for sure. So we have to, all levels of government need to participate in that. But in addition to that, our municipalities and our counties, I believe, do have to do more. And I tell them, if they were here too, is that we have lands that are not being developed. And I'll give you an example in Goderich, is where McGee Motors used to be. That is sat empty for almost 20 years. It's incredible to me that property, prime property, can sit empty for 20 years, where it could be an apartment building, a development where you could house hundreds of people, okay? If you look at what Belgrave's doing, of course, part of it's Morris Turnberry, part of it's in another municipality, but on the west side of Belgrave, okay, the municipality owns the land, and they're gonna open it up and develop it. And I think our municipalities need to do more of that, because the payback on some of these homes from property taxes are thousands and thousands and thousands. And if it's Goderich, it's many thousands of dollars a year, but it's a lot of money. So we need to do more of this. We need to open up more land. Alan and Tony and everybody will know, if you door knock enough, there's a lot of vacant homes just sitting empty. We need to get rapping on the doors of those property owners and find out why this home is sitting empty. What's going on? How can we make this a property that you can either rent or sell and let somebody buy it and renovate it and live in it?
Okay. And Nicholas, did you want to weigh in on the housing question?
I would also add that barrier-free housing would be a good thing to add. Because I find that is difficult to find too.
Okay.
This side of the room
Okay.
and let somebody else join on this side. My friend Maureen would do that for us. And is it signed? It's not, okay?
Okay, me again, great. So this one we'll direct to you, Nicholas, because you haven't had one of these to you first. And then the others can jump in. There are constituents in your riding who identify as trans and or LGBTQ+. If elected, will you vote your party line or will you vote your conscience? What does your conscience tell you? And that one's to you first, Nicholas.
That's a good question.
I would vote probably my party line supporting such people.
Okay. Anything else you wanted to add on that? Okay, and did you want me to follow the same order? If so, Tony would go next on that one.
Well, my party line and my conscience do align very nicely here in terms of saying that transgender people or gay, lesbian are a part of our community and our people. And as I say, our Quaker group struggled with the issue of gay marriage about in the 70s and came to the conclusion that that was something we felt was appropriate. And our very small meeting in Kitchener has had a couple in it as well. So, yeah, they're both in line.
Excellent. And Ben, you next?
I'd vote my conscience, obviously, and you know, I really believe everybody's protected by the law and everybody's embraced. That's the way I feel, and if somebody loves somebody, I'm just glad they found somebody to love. And I think that's probably where we all look at it. And I think that we have a big country, we have big things to focus on, and we want to make sure everybody feels welcome, whatever way they think. And that's the way I've always looked at it, thought about it, and felt it. And times certainly through the years, if you 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, I mean, it's 2019, right? So people need to get over it and get on with it.
Okay. And Alan?
I mean, one way to embrace somebody who's trans or LGBTQ is to actually embrace them. Like, go where they are, take part in their events, use the sort of podium of a public figure to demonstrate, not just through a vote or through words, demonstrate through your actions our society has changed. We are not going back. If some people are uncomfortable with others, they're going to have to learn to deal with it. I think it's incumbent on the leaders in our community, on an issue like this, where we have made so much progress in just a few years, to look for opportunities, to actually embrace those. And I mean, 3 years ago, I was approached by a guy named Fort Papalia in Kincardine, who was very bravely in small town Ontario trying to start a pride group and wanted to hold a parade and asked for help. And I wasn't, it's not like I was that involved in it, but I gave a bit of help, a bit of advice on social media and reaching out and invitations, and took part in that parade. And, you know, they were a bit scared leaving the fairgrounds at Connaught Park and heading up to the main street of Kincardine. They did not know what was going to await them. And there was a bit of trepidation. And they got to the main street and turned right, and it was like a Santa Claus parade without Santa. And it was amazing. And I don't know if I was ever prouder of my community that we did that together. I was glad to be there. I was glad that my Prime Minister, who is a leader on this front, embraced that event specifically by giving them a shout out on social media and supporting them. They've done this 2 more times since then. I think it's really important to be part of those events. This was a watershed, the first Pride event in rural southwestern Ontario. And I think our public figures.
Thank you, everybody. So I think everybody's had a chance at that question, but we want some follow-up questions on the LGBT. So you guys want to do it?
I have a question for Ben.
Okay, Heidi.
Based on what you've said
Heidi, I'm
tonight,
just going to give you the mic so that everybody in the room.
okay. Based on what you've said tonight, you're saying that that is your conscience that you would vote with. But when the Bill C-16 came up, you voted against it. Why was that?
It's already covered in the law. That's the reality of the situation. It's already
So-
covered in the law.
What's Bill C-16?
That's the truth.
What's that bill?
Can you elaborate?
What's
Not
that bill?
everybody knows what C-61 is.
Well, it's C-16.
16, sorry.
Yeah, so it was to add another line it was just to add another line to specifically mention the LGBTQ community, but everybody's already covered in the law by that. So that was our rationale behind at least my decision to vote on it. But I understand your point, and there's certainly some people that felt that it was very, very important to them to vote in that certain way. But that's the way I voted, and I mean, if the bill had failed, everybody is still protected anyways. And I asked Murray Rankin of the NDP, who's a prominent lawyer, who's a friend of mine, and that's what he mentioned to me as well. Now, he voted for Bill 16, but that was what he had said to me.
Okay.
And by the way, I've employed someone who is gay as well, so they were a great employee. So if you want to talk about actions, I have. And so that's why I say I look at the quality of the work from somebody and what they do, and if they're a great worker and a great person, then it doesn't matter to me.
Okay. And do any of the other candidates want to just weigh in with a point on this question at all? No? Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't be legalistic about it. To me, it's not sort of what's the bare minimum in the law or what's the legal advice. You're going to embrace, and would any harm come from voting in favor of that legislation? It's a public statement of what you believe in, and it's nice to hear Ben talking about his views on this. I think it's great. I think that's good to hear from our member of parliament, and we should also hear it clearly and forcefully from anyone who seeks to lead in this country. I think it should be absolutely clear, crystal clear, where people stand on these issues, and not just a kind of, oh, I'll respect the law. I just don't think talking about that minimum threshold is good enough anymore.
Okay. And Tony wants to weigh in too.
Well, Fran and I have also taught a couple enrichment course over a number of decades, who trained through Friends General Conference, and have worked with both straight and gay couples, and found it really wonderful, because love is a wonderful thing, however and wherever you can find it. But we also talk about communication, and making things more explicitly clear is actually a really good idea for avoiding confusion, or not everybody's a lawyer. And so making things explicitly clear is not a bad idea. So, that's what Bill 16 is trying to do, make that, really clear. And so, I think that would have added to people's clarity and understanding.
Okay. And just give Nicholas a chance to weigh in on this if you wanted to.
If I expect people to respect me for being different in some way, then it only makes sense to respect them for their differences.
Okay.
Okay, so we have one pulled. Is there a name on this one?
Yes,
Okay, and can you read the name?
Jackie.
Jackie, okay. Jackie, I'll meet you over here. Just get a little exercise for my back.
And Jackie, you can let us know if you have a specific candidate you want to direct this one to initially, or if I should select from my list.
No, this is a general.
Okay, so we'll go to Tony then.
Okay. So while the group gathered here in this room will happily talk about the benefits of life in rural Ontario, there are aspects of society that wish to capitalize on rural Ontario for more nefarious purposes. Human trafficking is growing, and rural Ontario is being used increasingly as a spot for human traffickers to pick up their victims, but it's also the isolation of rural Ontario is being used as a spot for human traffickers to bring their victims and isolate them and keep them under their control. What would your party do for rural crime and the specifics of rural crime that make us different than urban areas?
Okay, that's to you first, Tony.
Jackie, that's not one that's come up before, and I would have to research it a lot more to come up with a party position on it. So I can't answer it from a party perspective. But certainly, I'm appalled by what you're saying, and it's not something that I've been aware of or come across. Certainly, meth production is certainly one of the things that we're concerned about, and the whole opioid crisis is another area. But human trafficking has to be one of the most appalling things. And the issue of community versus isolation, rural areas, yes, can be isolating. And one of the things you may remember in 2008 when I ran that I talked about was trying to address some of our transportation issues with a rideshare program, or what might be like a community cooperative Uber, which I hitchhiked in that election, so that I got to meet a whole lot of very nice people. And one of the ways to build community is to use our transportation as a networking process that, again, could help deal with at least some of the isolation and might reduce the risk of victimization by people in the community. But the issue of bringing people in and having an old farmhouse,
Yeah, Huron County does have a human trafficking case manager, specifically dealing with victims of human trafficking in our county. So if you think it's not here, it is here, and it's a growing problem.
Okay, thank you so much for such a compelling question. I'm gonna go through our usual order and ask Ben to respond to that question next.
Right, thanks. Jackie's absolutely correct. There's been young girls just right in this very community, my hometown of Clinton, who have been victims of this. Years ago, it might have been the foreign person from wherever that had come over and had this happen to them. That has changed. It's now basically online solicitation through Facebook and what have you, where they trick young, unassuming, mainly girls, and they have their life destroyed before they barely turn 16 or 17 years old, and it's absolutely unacceptable. And our crimes, or the punishment for the crime, it just doesn't match the impact that it has on a young girl in her life. I've talked to local parents who've had this happen, and it's devastating, and it takes years to rehabilitate yourself. And a guy might get 6 or 7 years in prison for something where a young female's maybe been victimized hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, just in London off the 402. So we need to get serious about cracking down on these crimes. We need to change the laws. We need to give the police the flexibility to go after these people and not allow them to get away scot-free. And we need to let the laws react to the online realities that we're facing here today and really get serious about this, because this is seriously wrecking young people's lives.
Thank you. And I'll ask Alan to respond to the question next.
I mean, thanks for the question. I think it's just another example of, you know, rather than always focusing on the kind of idyllic rural environment that we live in, there is an underbelly to our communities. Tony talked about meth. You know, I hear from young people, we have no idea the problems with drug abuse in our societies. And so young women, and probably young men as well, being victimized in this way is really important. We just need to talk about it more, and again, figure out who's doing what, who's in charge of what, how do we tackle this, how do we get more information, more public awareness. Maybe there are things that we should all be watching out for and be aware of, warning signs. Sometimes when you knock on a door, you're a little suspicious of the person that comes forward and who they are and why they're there. So I think we just need to know a lot more about it. So thanks for the question.
Thank you. And Nicholas, did you want to comment on the human trafficking question?
I don't think I have anything to add to what's been said already.
Okay. Thank you very much to all the candidates for your answer to that question.
Two questions
left, okay.
And is it signed?
It is something.
Oh, it's Jackie again.
Sorry, I'm really yappy.
Wonderful question
I
so
need my
far,
question,
Jackie,
though.
don't be shy.
Oh, sorry. That's okay, so sorry. I probably know it in my head anyway. So I've been a citizen of this county for 40 lots of years.
That's a new number.
And I've seen a gradual erosion of our public services. And the example are rural post offices. You know, in my little village, the post office only opened from 8:30 till 4:30, and that's not when I'm in town. As a public servant, I've seen good jobs located to urban centers. This building is one. I've been a provincial public servant for 26 years. And, you know, it's one thing for us to be able to act locally in public services and influence how those services are delivered. But increasingly, even at the provincial level, the influence that we have of living here and being part of rural Ontario, our rural and ag policies are made in urban centers. They're not coming from people that live here and experience those services. Technology allows me to work from home now, it allows me to work here, but I can tell you that working as a public servant, working in Huron County is seen as a death knell for your career. And it means all of our bright, aspiring rural policy and agricultural policy people are leaving. And how can we keep those services here in the county?
Thank you, Jackie. Did you have a candidate that you wanted to direct that to? Or I'm going to go to Ben first, because we're starting at the top of the order again.
Thanks for the question, Jackie. You maybe edged me out by a year or two with your summation there. With the federal employees, really, you mentioned the post office, and they've kind of seen a renaissance in a lot of ways with Amazon and Shopify, and really what was a grim story 7 or 8 or 9 years ago has actually become a pretty busy story. And you can talk to the people that work at the post office. There's lots of packages and square boxes they sell or ship each and every week. So that part is good. The other federal employees that we see here locally, there's some at the Ag Research Center at the south end of the riding. And then other than that, it would be the people that station the Service Canada offices. And they've had some of their responsibilities actually expanded through passports. We do a lot of the passports here in my offices, but they also help out with that. So my position always is that some of the most cost-effective delivery of service occurs in a rural area. And so any of the rural federal jobs that would be available, and again, there are limited numbers here in Huron-Bruce, but certainly they need to stay in rural, and let's not ship them to Edmonton, let's not ship them to London. There are some in the nuclear industry that are stationed through NRCan at Bruce Power. Those obviously are going to be staying where they are. But if there is an opportunity, maybe down the road what there should be, say for example in Windsor, when they're looking at CRA office, maybe they should allow all the rural communities to bid on office space, because we can on a square foot basis blow them away on housing, and people would probably want to move here. I don't look at it as a dead end, and I know you don't either, but certainly if those are the only options, I can see where people are coming from. So.
Okay, and I'll go to Alan second for that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need some new thinking on rural economic development. So part of that is what impact can government actually have by locating service centers and areas of expertise in rural communities. So that's important. But I just think, I'm glad that we now have a Minister of Rural Economic Development who is focusing exclusively on that subject. Years ago, at the federal level, we had something called the Rural Secretariat, which was an all-of-government approach to try to apply this kind of rural lens to policy and decision-making. That came to an end, and I think we need to revive that kind of thinking and just look. We've touched on a lot of these issues where we just need much more research and thinking and action across all three levels of government, and to get them to focus on rural economic development, how we can work together to deal with housing and transportation, mental health, seniors. Like every issue has a rural dimension, and I just don't think we're pulling the strands together well enough to try and come up with something coherent.
Thank you. Nicholas, did you want to weigh in on that question?
I believe that we would expand like Canada Post's fleets to electric vehicles, and strengthen Canada Post in the rural areas.
Okay. And finally, Tony, did you want to weigh in on that one?
Well, one of the tragedies of the closing of and cutting back of the OMAF offices was that we lost the eyes and the ears on the ground, and people who had decades of experience in our communities across Ontario. And that's one of the things that we don't often take into account when some bureaucrat centrally says, oh, we can save a little money doing this. Often you don't even save the money. That's the real tragedy of these things. Certainly the consolidation of our municipalities didn't seem to be a huge cost saver when you come right down to it. It certainly meant you had less local awareness and control. When it comes to some of the specifics, we're suggesting that there are an awful lot of places that still have post offices but don't have banks anymore. And that one of the things that we need to be looking at is maybe perhaps letting our postal system become a bank access or money access point for those communities that no longer have a bank. And so we are going to need to be creative. And we're certainly talking about investing in a variety of agricultural research, reinvesting in that in a much bigger way, which will hopefully bring expertise back out into the areas where that research occurs, and a program of investing in rural agricultural infrastructure in communities that need it. But we're also going to have to be a lot smarter about saying, as we start to really grapple with climate change, one size is not going to fit all, and we're going to need communities to think about what works with their social structure and with their ecosystem to develop programs that really help us reduce our carbon footprint and our ecological footprint while letting us carry forward in creative ways. And one of the things we're going to have to grapple with if we're talking about economics is, can we thrive without our current concept of economic growth, which is really in many ways ecologically problematic.
All right, thank you once again to all the candidates for your thoughtful answers to that question. And how are we? Do we have one last question there, Michelle?
We have one last question.
Alrighty.
I'll ask my friend Laura to pull it and let me know if there's a name on it.
There is no name. Okay, so I'm delivering it to you.
Sure.
And you get the basket too.
Okay. Door prize. Okay. This is directed to a certain candidate. The name Ben Lobb is written at the top. So, what is your position about the LGBTQ plus community? Do you know what the letters stand for? I didn't write the question.
I mean, we've kind of already covered this, and I think I think that question maybe is a little bit tongue-in-cheek if I know the letters, but anyways, I appreciate the debate tonight, and I think we've had a great discussion, and I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out here to do tonight. And yes, I do know what the letters mean, and no, I won't recite them for you here. Thank you.
Fair enough. So that brings us to the end of the basket questions. So I'll turn things over to Kimberly Payne.
Great. So we're actually wrapping up a little earlier than we anticipated, and what I would like to do is I feel that this last part of the evening was really the best part, and there was this great conversation that we've seen. And rather than revisit those first questions, what I would ask the candidates to do is to look at the questions that we sent you, and if you had something more you'd like to add to those, if you would email it to me, and then I can post it to the Engaged Women of Huron Facebook page, which is a closed group, so that group would see those responses. But I have really, I don't know how everybody else feels, but I think the last part of the discussion really resonated with me, so thank you for your candid responses through that.
Pam, you're giving us homework.
Absolutely. Well, people here and people at home, because this is being broadcast live, by the way, want to hear what the candidates have to say. So before we kind of wrap things up, is there any other questions from the floor? Julie Sacha.
Yes. Microphone. Statistics from the Rick Hansen Foundation would support that 20% of Canadians identify as having a disability, and that number is going to increase by the year 2036 to 25%, probably even more with our aging population. So I would like to know what your party would do if elected to support improvement of access to all facilities, as the Rick Hansen Foundation says, access to all, everyone, everywhere. So what would your party do to help support accessibility, not just for physical disabilities, but all types of disabilities, barrier-free housing, transportation, recreation, everything, everywhere.
And did you want to direct that to a certain candidate first, or can I follow my order? Okay, I'll put that to Alan first, just following our usual order here.
Well, Julie, the first thing I would do is talk to you. I mean,
Very wise answer.
you're one of the people in the room who's a leader in this field. So we have expertise, we have some lived experience. So it's, I guess, an example where we've got to be reaching out and tapping into the resources that we have. You know, this is probably another one of those areas where in a rural community we lag a little bit, right? And it's part of diversity, it's part of inclusiveness, it's part of making sure that everyone can contribute to their fullest, be themselves, be welcome, get access to everything everybody else has in society. So now, how you confront that at the level of government, from the federal government down to province and municipalities, is maybe a puzzle. And so I think it's one of those where, again, we just have to put our heads together and talk about it more. Make sure we're engaging with those who have the expertise. And every time the occasion arises, ask this question. So Nicholas raised it when we're all talking about housing. Well, accessibility to housing is a huge challenge, and vastly more so in a rural setting than in an urban setting. So I don't know the answer to your question. I just know it's a really important question that as a member of parliament you have to confront.
Thank you. And following the order, Nicholas, did you want to weigh in on the question that Julie poses about accessibility?
I would advocate for it as best as I could, knowing that with my experience, and we definitely need to reach out to the people that have the experience to be able to give their perspectives and move forward with experience, knowledge of the experiences.
Thank you. To you, Tony.
As I said, I'd encourage people to go online, Google NDP commitments, because you can see our New Deal for People. Page 63 talks about removing barriers for persons living with disabilities. It talks about strengthening the Accessibility Act to cover all federal agencies equally, and enforcement of accessibility standards in a timely manner. But also talks about income security, improving employment programs to help people with disabilities make the best use of their abilities in terms of employment, increasing employment insurance to cover sickness issues, and then of course the pharmacare, our mail delivery, improving that, and accessible housing, and also a national autism program. So that's just one page, but the document itself kind of cross-references. We live in a web of services and a web of involvement. So, all these things interconnect in various ways. And I've been impressed with the way a New Deal for People connects those different pieces across different sort of ministerial silos. So I'd encourage people to have a look at that.
Thank you. And to you, Ben.
Thank you. At the bare minimum, I believe that every government, federal or provincial, should have a minister of disability or minister of state of disability with a portfolio and a budget. Obviously, a lot of it's already built into the building code, all right, for accessibility, et cetera, for new builds. But there's more to do. There's a ton of buildings that need to be retrofitted still, so possibly some funding to provide to help bring those up to standards. In addition to that, people with other disabilities, there's plenty of adults that have a disability that live with their parents still. Those parents are getting older. I've talked to lots of those parents in our areas. Some are friends, and we need a place, we need housing for those people so that the parents feel safe and secure, that as they age, they know that their son or daughter will be cared for in a nice, clean facility or a home that they can share with other people and have a good quality of life. We know that we're lacking in Huron-Bruce for those types of homes, and we need more of those homes. There's some great examples in Kincardine, for example, of a multi-unit home where a number of people live together and they've got a great lifestyle and they really have a great life. In addition, though, there are a number of buildings, I'm sure many of us will know, there's a number of buildings, not only in Huron-Bruce, but across the country, where the doors with the buttons, the push buttons to open the automatic door does not work. There's too many of those, and we need to really make that enforcement strict, because too many for too long don't work, and that's unacceptable. So there's a lot that we can do, and from a federal level, at the bare minimum, all of our buildings should be up to code. And I will note that even some of the AGCO, well, my time's up, but anyways, federal code at the bare minimum.
Thank you very much to all the candidates for your answers to that question, and I'm going to kick it back to Kim.
It was actually a really good question, thanks Julie, because tonight we chose the facility because it is wheelchair accessible. And actually, we did ask the candidates not to answer the questions out of respect for Nicholas, because Nicholas can't stand. And so that's why we asked the candidates to remain seated, so that it was actually, so it's not just about the physical, it's about the recognition of the values and the characters that we have as humans, and the respect for people who aren't at the same level of accessibility that some of us are. So that was one of the reasons why and thank you, Monica, for addressing that early on. So we do have another question here, if people will bear with us.
Yep.
Hi, so I have a question, and I want it to be answered by everyone, but Ben, I want to hear your answer first, if you don't mind. So this is an Engaged Women's forum, and one of the questions that I thought might have been asked is the rights of women. So our right our body, our choice. What do you say about it first, Ben? And then I want you to tell me not only what you say about it, what your party says about it, how you voted out east in the convention, which is something that Mr. Scheer no longer talks about. But then I want to hear it from everyone because I want to hear everyone's view.
First of all, I wouldn't judge anybody on, I personally wouldn't judge anybody on their view. I think we're all entitled to our view on, you're asking specifically about the question about abortion, I'm guessing, is that what your question was about?
Rights of women's choices, yes.
Rights of women's choices on abortion, right?
On, yes, their right to
On
choose
their-
their body, their life.
I just wanted to make sure, there's all sorts of different rights, but I know that's probably specific
Okay.
questions around. So first of all, I would say, I wouldn't judge anybody on their views. There's people with all sorts of different views. I'm pro-life. That's the way I look at it, pro-life. My voting record backs up the fact that I'm pro-life. And our party has obviously, this has been in the news a gazillion times, has said it wouldn't reopen the question on abortion. And we were in government for 10 years and never reopened the issue on abortion. So I think that answers your question.
Nope, not part of it.
Okay.
Part of it was what happened out
Question,
east.
okay.
Sorry.
Sure.
Then the other part was what happened out east at your convention, and how did you vote out there? How did Mr. Scheer vote out there to the party that elected him to be your leader?
I'll be honest with you, I don't remember. I can't remember the question. I mean, if you send it to me, I can get it back to you in an email, but at a convention of amongst hundreds and hundreds of topics that were voted on, I can't remember that one. So, there you go.
So following the usual order, I'll let that question go to Alan next, please.
So I think this question is about a woman's right to choose, and I'm happy to be absolutely clear. I believe fundamentally in a woman's right to choose and reproductive rights. I'm proud of a Prime Minister that has been absolutely clear-cut on that subject, and it is words and it is action, and it's a case where government policy, in creating the first ever feminist foreign aid policy in Canada, we restored programs that helped empower women in the developing world to exercise their reproductive rights, something that had been stripped away from our foreign aid. I think this is fundamental. I agree with Ben that I don't judge somebody else. I will respect somebody else's view. The one area where I think we have a right to be a little bit more judgmental is the people who choose to lead our country, the people who put themselves forward to be our leaders and to be our Prime Minister in particular. So I don't begrudge anyone their view, but I do find it puzzling that a leader, and I'm not talking about you, Ben, I'm talking about your leader. I do find it puzzling that someone would seek to be the Prime Minister of this country and say to people, now, this is what I believe, but don't worry, I'm not going to do anything about that thing that I believe in. I'm just going to leave it alone. So, fair enough, maybe that's true, and in 10 years in government, that was the case. But my question would be, why the hell are you getting into politics if you don't want to act on the things that you believe in? So, given a choice, I would much prefer a leader who can stand up and say, this is what I believe in, and I'm in politics to do something about it. I am going to protect a woman's right to choose, and that will translate across policy in our government.
Thank you, and time is up on that one. I'm going to see if Tony or Nicholas would like to weigh in on this question. Tony?
Well, being pro-choice 40 years ago was a little bit more exciting. And the NDP and Tony McQuail were pro-choice in terms of saying it's a woman's right to choose. But I also had quite a few arguments for saying, how can you be pro-life if you don't support spending money on our healthcare system? How can you be pro-life if you aren't trying to make the lives of those who have been most marginalized a little bit better by having social programs that support single moms and education and childcare? So I've always felt that the NDP, if not pro-life in the way that it's quoted has been the one that's been supporting the lives of ordinary people, trying to make them better. So maybe I was playing semantics with these folks, but certainly a woman's right to choose is a woman's right to choose. But the other thing in terms of hypocrisy is an interesting thing, and I have to thank Ben for reminding me of this. But we heard 1,800 times in 2015 that we were going to not have one of these first past the post elections where over 9 million of us are going to cast ballots that don't earn any representation. And so I don't feel that Mr. Trudeau believed very strongly in what he was saying when it came to saying that he was going to make every vote count. And so,
if you want to debate proportional representation, we
That
can have
actually has
another half
nothing
hour
to do with the
Canadian.
question that was on the floor.
no, it was the way that it got spun back again in terms of leadership.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. And I look to you, Nicholas, did you want to weigh into on the question of a woman's right to choose?
I would say I'm pro-choice, and Green Party's pro-choice. But I respect people who feel otherwise as well, I guess.
Okay. Thank you very much to all the candidates for your thoughtful answers to that question. We have another question from the floor?
No, I think we're good for the, oh, we do. One more, and then I think we'll go to the 2-minute wrap-up
Sure.
of each of the candidates, okay?
So this is going to be totally transparent. I feel like if you could be pro-choice, I could vote for you. I feel like I understand conservative ideals to try and keep our country from going bankrupt, and I feel like the other parties don't understand that. But I am terrified of a leader and a party that might potentially go into power and take away women's rights to choose what happens to their own bodies. And so I'm here tonight because I'm grappling with this, and I was really hoping that you would answer that question differently, Ben. Not that I was hoping you were having different views, because I think I agree, everyone is allowed to have their own private beliefs, so long as they are not enforced on other people. And I think, you know, as a physician, I can have beliefs about whatever, which are not something I require my patients to believe in order to get my care. Just like I would hope that you wouldn't expect any of us to have the same beliefs as you in order to be governed by you, and in order to have like the daily workings of government to be governed by you. But I think myself and my friends are really genuinely afraid of what will happen if we vote conservative and then not just anti-abortion, but you know, right-wing values and other, you know, anti-immigration and racist values and things that, like, let me just be totally transparent. There's so many things I like about you, Ben, but I'm afraid of your party, and I'd really like this fear addressed in like layman's terms, because I think that I'm not the only one.
Okay, so I can see that one was directed to you, Ben, so I'll let you
I think most of the questions are directed to me. But carry on, I figured this is what was going to happen tonight. So, anyways, it was nice to show up.
Whoa, because we're women?
No, that's not
okay.
at all.
Okay.
What I will say...
I do like you. I like that you're honest. I like that you're straightforward. I like that you tell us where you're coming from. And I like that you're at important events. And I like that you care about what happens in our community. And I like things about you. And I want to vote for you. But I'm afraid of you. And I'm not the only one.
You're afraid of me. Now there's a good endorsement right
There we go.
No, what I'll say is
It's
this.
just
What I'll
that
say is
particular
this.
thing.
What I'll say is this. If the number one issue on someone's ballot is I support abortion, okay, then there's 3 other people to vote for, if that's the number 1 issue, okay? What my point was earlier tonight was, we were in government for 10 years. We never reopened the abortion debate. Andrew has answered the question 100 times. He will not reopen the debate. Our party will not reopen the debate. It is in our party's policy. It has been in our party's policy for more than a decade that we will not reopen the debate. So I don't know how much more full stop we can do than to say that we will not reopen the debate. But we will also, unlike the other political parties, we will respect people's points of view. So we have inside of our party people who are pro-choice. We have people inside our party who are pro-life. You don't get kicked out of our party for having either view. You are welcome in both parties. And in regards to the other stuff, we are pro-immigration. Our immigration policy, we're going to have 300,000.
And that's the end of the time. So I don't like to cut people off, but it's part of my job. So I'm going to look to the other candidates because we have talked about the women's right to choose question previously, but there was a specific question directed at Ben there, and I would like to give the other candidates a chance to respond if they wish. Okay, Alan, I'll go to you.
I mean, you also talked about same-sex marriage, and I think those issues, these, you know, social issues that we have come a long way, like incredible ground that we have covered in less than a generation. I think it is very important to know, we have the right to know, I think, what our political leaders believe. And so I think these are important questions to ask, and I do think they should be answered, and they should be answered directly. And I'm proud of the fact that my leader is crystal clear on these subjects, and there's no ambiguity what his views are on these really important social issues that we just cannot go back on. You know, that's why we're campaigning under a slogan of choose forward. We've made all this progress in our society. We cannot even contemplate going back. And that's why it does matter what people's personal beliefs are if they seek to lead our country. That's part of our choice. That's part of the choice. This is the way our system works. You're not just choosing among us. This Tony doesn't like it, but this convoluted system of, you know, you vote for one of us, you also get our leader if we win. So it really matters who's leading in the country, what they believe in, and how you feel about that, your comfort level with those people and their beliefs. Do they share your beliefs, your value system? And that influences how you govern. It's part of your mindset. This is what I believe in, and I'm going to do something about it. And I think we have a right to hear that from our political leaders, not, this is what I believe in, but don't worry, I won't do anything about it. I find that very puzzling.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. Wanted to weigh in on this next?
Well, I'd like to step back and say that the only reason you had this dilemma is because we don't have a mixed member proportional system where you could vote for Ben Law, the person, and vote against, or actually vote for a party that you felt more in tune with in terms of its overall values and principles. And this is a tragedy of the failure of Justin Trudeau to make good on his promise, because the only reason you have to worry about strategic voting in this election is because the promise wasn't kept. So a phony Scheer majority could be on the table, a phony Trudeau, a phony Singh majority, even a phony May majority. And that would be tragic for the Greens because they got cheated out of 12 representatives in 2004 when they got 4.5% of the vote but didn't get a single seat. And so we haven't had that Green vote well represented for the last 15 years. And what a loss to us as a country not to have that voice there. So we could have steady progress if we hadn't had all these phony liberal and phony conservative majorities with policy lurch this way and policy lurch that way, instead of representing what the majority of Canadians wanted by having representatives who actually represented the majority of Canadians forming governments. That's the tragedy of our system, is we've been cheated out of a process that would have let us capture our collective wisdom much sooner. And so I hope you will think about that very carefully when you make your choices, and I will touch on it again in my final remarks.
Thank you, Tony. And Nicholas, did you want to weigh in on this question about how the party leaders feel about pro-life or pro-choice?
I'm not sure I have anything to add.
Okay. All right, so with that, we're going to move into the concluding part of our evening together. Earlier, we had Ben lead off with his opening remarks, so I'm just going to reverse the order. So we'll first hear concluding remarks from Tony, then we will have Nicholas, then we'll have Alan, and then Ben. So if the candidates are ready, I'm going to invite you to deliver your summary remarks to the group tonight. And Tony.
My name is Tony McQuail, your NDP candidate in the riding. I first ran in 1980. Back then, we did have a generation to sort out problems of regeneration and ecological sustainability. We don't have that much time anymore, which is why I'd like to suggest to you that you need to think very, very carefully about whether you've been happy with the policy lurch and the flip-flop between the conservatives and liberals over the last 40 years. Because you need to decide not who has the sweetest policy book, because we've been promised daycare for a long time. We've been promised pharmacare for a long time. We've been promised electoral reform since, well, actually in 1923 was the first time it was studied. It said proportional representation, but the liberals and conservatives didn't do anything with it. Studied again in 1934. Again, they sat on their hands because they liked the system. And the people who really backed them, the 1%, like the system. But it hasn't been serving ordinary Canadians well. So you need to not just ask who's got nice policies and who has a handsome prime minister or a handsome leader. You need to ask who might actually be on your side and prepared for the tough struggle of taxing the ultra wealthy and going after the tax evaders so that we actually have the money to do the things you'd like to do, because my dad was an accountant. And there are a couple ways to balance books. One is to just cut, cut, cut. But the other is to say, how do you increase the income? How do you get the money in that you need so that you can provide the services? And as I told a 5th grade class, if somebody offers you a chocolate bar tax cut and then takes $20 out of your piggy bank in terms of service cuts, are you ahead? And those smart little kids said, no. And I'll tell you something, a tax break does not help the poor very much because they already aren't paying much in taxes. So I say vote NDP for a new deal for people.
Thank you very much, Tony. Now I'll go to you, Nicholas, for your concluding remarks.
Nicholas Van Leer for Green Party in Huron-Bruce. And I'm not the best at coming up with words on the spot sometimes. Yeah, well, I guess I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. To you, Alan.
So thanks to all of you for coming out. Thanks to Engaged Women of Huron for organizing this event. It is a unique format, and you know, it's not that all issues are women's issues, but there's so many things where I think women end up being impacted so directly and care so deeply. And so it's good that we can spend a bit of time talking about those. It's good that we've had a format where we can actually kind of talk to each other a little bit and exchange and demonstrate hopefully that we can disagree without being disagreeable. But ultimately too, sometimes we do have to disagree, and because you have a choice, you will have a choice to make. And I think you deserve to have as much put in front of you to help you make that choice as possible. And to try to differentiate, what is it? We're all talking about cutting taxes and spending more money on our seniors and healthcare and childcare. And so how do you make this distinction and how you want to cast your ballot? Because it is our names that are on that ballot. You will be choosing one of us. And maybe it's probably unfortunate that it's a bunch of guys sitting up here. At another time and place, hopefully that won't be the case. But for right now, we're what you've got, and you will be making a choice. And I think you're entitled to ask questions about values. And it's not just legalistic answers about what you would or wouldn't do. I think it's refreshing to be able to ask those questions about values and to choose people who you feel not only share your values, because you're not always going to have people who think the same as you, otherwise we'd get an awful cookie cutter kind of government. But choose people who share your values and are going to do something about them, are going to act on the things that they believe in. So I choose Forward, and I really encourage you to do the same and vote for Alan Thompson on October 21st.
Thank you, Alan. And to you, Ben.
Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful evening here tonight. And for my friends out there, they might be happy to know that Justin Trudeau, until recently, was your pro-life candidate. And there's a 2011 article in a Peterborough newspaper where Justin Trudeau says because of his Catholic beliefs that he is pro-life. So people can check that. And in regards to what Alan's saying, in regards to people say one thing and do nothing, I mean, in reality, that's kind of the Liberal platform for the last 30 years. And so whether it's on climate change, where it's on balanced budget, whether it's on pharmacare, childcare, you name it, they say one thing during the election, and then when it comes time to govern, they do very little. So when Tony says it's time to change the system, I agree with my buddy Tony 110%. In regards to some of the stuff that we have done and we would look forward to do if we were a new Conservative government, women in the trades, women entrepreneurs. The International Day of the Women was a Conservative initiative led at the UN. There's an entrepreneurial program being rolled out in Japan right now that mirrors what we did when we were in government for women. I grew up in a household that had a very strong mother, and so I saw firsthand her at night working on her education, playing sports, and doing many things. So it's been a great discussion here tonight. I wish each and every one of you nothing but the best, and I hope at the very least on October 21st you all get out to vote, and if you find it in your heart, you vote Ben Lobb and you vote Conservative. Thank you, and God bless each and every one.
Thank you, Ben. I just wanted to thank all of the candidates for the debate tonight, and I think that it was a good-natured debate, and that I want to thank you for the respect that you gave to the timers and to myself as the moderator. And I'll hand it over to Kim.
Thanks, Monica, and a big round of applause for Monica Walker-Bolton. To give a shout out to Tony Martins, our timekeeper, and Jacob Crosby, who looked after the sound and supported the timekeeper as well. I know some unanswered questions in the crowd, and I had to say no to some people at the back, and I feel badly about that, but we just really ran out of time, and it is warm in this room, and people need to get home. So on behalf of Engaged Women of Huron, I would like to say thank you to, of all the people, the fermented femmes, because this is out of my own personal pocket, and the femmes stepped up, and they are contributing to some of the costs for the sound and so on, because we believe so intensely that women need to be heard, and in our rural communities, and I know a lot of that was coming out tonight towards the end. So I really encourage everybody to stay on that page, and we'll try and get some of these questions out and some more feedback from the candidates. So thank you, Alan, Tony, Ben, and Nicholas for coming out tonight. Kevin Clerks had to work, was unable to join us. So on behalf of Engaged Women of Huron, thank you so much to each of you for coming out and being part of this conversation. And please, please, please vote. Take somebody with you to vote. Vote now. The polls are open. You can go and vote now, and you should vote now, just in case something happens to you. Stay home, everybody. Thank you so much.
put Desmond in this basket if anyone else wants to contribute to some of the costs.